If you've spent any time on the social media platform X, formerly Twitter, you've probably seen this phenomenon in which some account, some person on the platform becomes the main character for the day, becomes a symbol of a wider debate that is a springboard for some heated argument within the discourse. Sometimes this is intentional. People can be provocative, they can solicit a reaction, or they can bait their opponents in a debate into an overreaction. But other times it is unintentional. Someone writes a post and then it spins out of control and turns into something that it wasn't at the beginning. Well, this week I am the main character in a wide-ranging debate about Gen Z, about Panda Express, about migration, about DEI, that started unintentionally from a very simple reply that I had written to another Twitter user about the state of the economy. So let's review exactly what happened. Let's walk through this debate and try to parse fact from fiction, good from bad. So the genesis of this was part of this week-long debate amongst various factions on the political right about the economic fortunes of Gen Z, what they should be doing, how they should be structuring their lives, where they should be living, and what career paths they should be following. There was this idea presented that despite difficulties related to migration or housing costs or DEI, that the best course of action for Gen Z is to figure out a place where they can afford to live and start to build a career from the ground up. And the debate got centered symbolically on St. Louis. This idea that some people feel that they are above having to live in St. Louis or the surrounding suburbs, and other people argue, I think quite sensibly, that you can have a good life in the St. Louis metro area, and even if you want to live in Malibu or Brooklyn or the Mission District of San Francisco, you may not be able to afford to do so, and you should look for feasible alternatives in places further out of the major Tier 1 cities, or even, God forbid, in the American heartland. And in this debate, someone had commented that they're hearing all these horror stories about mass layoffs and about a kind of terrible labor market. And I replied, I think quite factually and quite truthfully, that of course, the news doesn't report hiring sprees as much as it reports mass layoffs. This is a kind of facet or an inevitability of how news works. Bad news travels much faster than good news. But if you actually look at the statistics, they suggest at least a reasonably robust labor market. The unemployment rate generally is 4%. For college grads, it's 3.5%. And for recent college grads, it's 5%, all within that tight range, which suggests that people that are getting out of college or people that have a bit more work experience, approximately 95% of those people who are looking for work are able to find work. Maybe not their ideal job at their ideal salary, but by their behavior, accepting the job and working at the job, they're signaling to the market that there is a fit between supply and demand. Economists call this full employment. There is considered to be a natural unemployment rate around 4% because people are switching jobs, quitting jobs, taking jobs, in between jobs. But they say that in a healthy labor market, 4% unemployment means that the economy is functioning quite well. I also pointed out that for non-college, non-trade workers, so workers in the service sector, there's evidence of robust wages, at least in comparison to what you might think for service jobs. And I pointed out that simply even the Panda Express down the street from here has a advertisement for an assistant manager at $70,000 a year plus benefits. I also pointed out that Chipotle is offering a management track position that you can enter with no experience and work your way up to, with a $100,000 salary plus full benefits, retirement, and a free college degree that you can take online in your off hours. And finally, UPS, the Teamsters Union, which represents the majority of UPS drivers, has negotiated a salary that is equivalent to $145,000 total compensation that will be going up to $170,000 total compensation for its delivery drivers. And so the point was simply this, that at all strata of the economy, there seems to be the possibility of decent or even strong wages. The median wage, more generally, is going up. The median wage for college graduates is going up. It's quite strong. It's already below the median wage in the economy overall. And not only skilled trades, but in fact, non-skilled labor in the service sector is exhibiting a tightening labor market. And we know that because if these companies are offering significant increases in salary, they are trying to get good workers, and they're willing to pay a premium. But this being social media, that's of course not how it was taken. And this debate spun out of control and was really the key focus of conversation over the course of this week, generating tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of social media impressions, and then spinning off into podcasts, articles, debates, hopefully no duels or anything extreme, but it really brought some heat. And I'd like to decipher and work our way through some of that heat to see what people are trying to say. We'll go with some of the most provocative arguments. The provocative argument from the kind of ultra-right, let's say, people that are on the hard right or even identitarian right, they were misinterpreting the tweet to say, Chris Rufo is suggesting that talented young white men abandon their hope of going to college and content themselves with downward mobility and a $70,000 job at Panda Express. Of course, I didn't say anything about race. I didn't say anything about what people should do. And of course, if you are academically gifted and you're ambitious and you have high aspirations, as I've long said, you should go to college, you should become a professional, because that's where elite influence resides. But I was merely saying that even if you are not going to that route, if you're, let's say, not academically gifted or inclined, there are still alternative avenues towards a decent wage. There were also, I think, two other important criticisms. The first of which is a criticism from, let's say, the knowledge work tier, and the second of which was a criticism related to the service work tier. The knowledge work criticism went something like this. College-educated, Gen Z, young adults are entering a workplace that is more difficult than in the past. Inflation, especially on housing, has made living in a tier one city with a lot of opportunities prohibitively expensive, really punitively expensive. This, of course, is true. I'll be the first to admit this, even in my own experience. This is true. It's why I don't live in California anymore or don't live in the city of Seattle anymore. I found that the economic trade-offs were not worthwhile. They also argued that migration, in particular H-1B migration, is undercutting wages for young Americans who are trying to get into corporate employment, computer programming, software engineering. They're being undercut and replaced by cheaper H-1B workers from, in particular, India. And of course, there is a legitimate factual basis for this grievance. The H-1B program is bringing in a lot of people at tech corporations. The criticism is that H-1B workers are taking jobs away or undercutting the wages of native-born American workers, especially young people who want to enter tech firms. And there is certainly a factual basis to this. I know even in my own experience, having a lot of friends in tech, that workers from India, for example, are paid much less than equivalent software engineers who were born and raised in the United States. And they use not only outsourcing firms, but insourcing firms. as a method of labor arbitrage. And this is something that I think policymakers should look at and decide whether it's worthwhile or not. And finally, they say that DEI hiring, especially in big corporations, has really made it much more difficult for white men in particular to secure corporate employment. This is true. This is something that I've been talking about, working on since 2021, when pointing this out was very unpopular and even had significant risks. And it's something that I've helped resolve by advocating for abolishing DEI and turning the federal civil rights apparatus against this obvious institutional racism and discrimination. But I think there's something that was happening that was beyond this critique. These are positions that, of course, I've had in the past and I continue to have in the present and will continue to have in the future. But there was a sense of resentment you could feel, anxiety, fear. I got the sense that a lot of young people who are in college or perhaps college educated are feeling a sense of anxiety about their own prospects. And again, this is part of the natural path of being in your 20s, figuring out where is my life going, how can I put together, am I going to succeed or fail? If you come from a college-educated, professional class household, there's also the added expectation that you have to do as well or better than your parents. And so these are natural fears and anxieties. But a lot of the discourse was putting this in what I think is a very crude direction, a very resentful direction, and in fact, a very entitled direction. People were out and out saying, all white men need to be guaranteed a $140,000 a year annual salary right out of college in a high prestige city of their choice. And I point out very simply something that should have been pointed out to this person in their real life relationships. Well, a $140,000 annual salary is in the top 10% of all income earners. And by definition, 50% of income earners are going to be below the median, 90% are going to be below the top decile. And because 50% of Americans in the workforce now have college degrees, you're essentially asking to leapfrog almost anyone with no experience right out of college, guaranteed. This is just not going to happen. It's an unrealistic expectation, and one that would be the same even if there were no DEI or H-1Bs or the cost of housing was 20 or 30% less than it is today. But I think there's a deeper generational problem, perhaps a disillusionment that's happened. When I was in my 20s, this was after the Great Recession. Millennials, we came into adulthood right around that time. And if you look at the numbers, unemployment was very high. The economy was very weak. It was very difficult for many people to get their foot in the door. And there was an ideology that crystallized around this time that had two parts. One was this, what I think of as kind of a hipster ideology. Rent in major cities, and especially second-tier cities, was very inexpensive at the time. You could rent a room in Brooklyn or Oakland or certain neighborhoods in Chicago very cheaply and feel like you're participating in big city life. This was partially gentrification, partially overbuilding, and partially that the suburban migration of the previous generation had reduced cost pressures on inner cities. It was also paired with a minimalist philosophy. Some of you may remember Mr. Money Mustache, who was an influencer of the time, who talked about how to be frugal, how to save money, how to live cheaply. Or what was popular even in professional circles was this idea of FIRE, how to retire, financial independence, retire early. How you can save money, how you can essentially opt out of unlimited corporate growth and live a life that you can afford long-term on a smaller income. And even on, I would say, the center-left, there was this idea that the creative class, there was a book by a demographer or kind of urban theorist named Richard Florida called The Rise of the Creative Class. It's essentially college-educated young people are going to flood into cities. They're going to have great food, restaurants, amenities. They're going to have, jobs at Google and jobs in the arts and jobs at other startups. And it's going to be this great flourishing of culture, technology, and the arts. And I think that this was actually a description of this small period of reality, of history rather, that was marked by a hipster culture that provided this kind of cultural agreement on how to adapt to the conditions of the Great Recession. There's something happening similarly with knowledge workers now in Gen Z. They're facing a very different challenge. The labor market is, by traditional measures, strong. This is actually true, and we should be, honest enough to admit that this was true, even if inflation, migration, DEI, et cetera, cause real problems. But those real problems are now different than they were a generation ago. And so you're a young person, your real constraints are now the price of an apartment, especially in an urban core, and the culture, which is hostile to you, especially if you are the very dreaded white male. You've been taught since you were in high school and college that you're the oppressor, that you're uniquely privileged, and that you should relinquish your status to others who are more worthy and really your spiritual superiors. And so the combination of these things, I think H-1B visas is a relatively minor problem compared to these two, but the combination of these two is putting genuine pressure on these workers. And so the question is, what is the proper formula in response? Millennials adapted in our own way. We figured out, some adequate formula. Gen Z has yet to figure that out. And right now, I think the reason this is such a heated debate is because people are trying to figure out, how do we respond? What is Gen Z ideology or the Gen Z adaptation to these conditions? And there are a number of propositions that are circulating online in this discourse. One is a identitarian solution. The white men are entitled to special privileges. This is something, of course, that I reject in favor of a colorblind equality. There is the kind of entitlement perspective to say, we deserve to have in X, Y, and Z these goods and services, this distribution of employment at these numbers right away. Again, this is unrealistic. You want to have a top 10% income, with no experience. On average, that's not going to happen. And then there is what I think I've kind of discerned as a society is the problem, and we're not going to get started until it's all burned down. This, again, I think is such a mistake because collective problems might be real, and we should all work towards solving them, but you still have to make an individual life. And I see many people succumbing to a kind of fatalism in which they feel like they cannot move forward with their own life because the system is unjust, everything is stacked against them, they'll never make it anyways. This is really analogous to the left-wing counterpart that was prominent around in the last 20 years. It's a mindset or an attitudinal question, a temperamental question sometimes, and it's something that I think is self-defeating. What I think is a better alternative is something very simple. It's almost so simple, I'm surprised that more people aren't automatically gravitating towards it. It's really segmenting out a collective problem and an individual problem. The collective problems that we've been talking about is quite simple. We need to stop unchecked migration, recalibrate the scales of how migration should work, and make sure that it's contributing to the well-being and happiness of the country as a whole, the common good. We should reduce the cost of housing by building more housing. Easier said than done. That will take time, but I think ultimately it's the right way to go. Even those of us who are older that own homes, through struggle and trials and tribulations over time, I think we can recognize that homes are overvalued, and that younger people will need to have cheaper alternatives available if they want to have the next step in their lives. I think that is good. Use that supply side economics to increase the supply of housing and therefore reduce the cost. And we have to abolish DEI. Discrimination against white men is just as bad as discrimination against black women. And so the solution is not to replace one identitarian policy with another, but simply to say companies have to just select the best people based on their accomplishments, not judge, reward, and punish them based on their ancestry. Well, but at the same time, while we're solving this collective problem, we have to be honest with people about their individual responsibilities. And this is not, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, oversimplification. It's simply to recognize that conditions will always be imperfect. But as an individual, you have to adapt to them, and you have to fight and struggle to put your own life together the best way that you can. And in fact, the opposite attitude is a guarantee of defeat, while this attitude is not a guarantee of success, but it's a guarantee that you're moving towards the possibility of success. And finally, bracketing this knowledge workers, we have another category that's important, which is trade and service workers. A lot of the discourse is, of course, engineered and debated by college-educated people. Twitter is the knowledge workers' social media platform. It's popular with people who are more educated, more literate, and more interested in social and political debates than its alternatives. But my original point about Panda Express and Chipotle and UPS, which were just examples that have been kind of in my own immediate observation, was that while I'm not saying that if you have a degree from Dartmouth that you should take a job as the assistant manager at Panda Express, I think you can do better, and I think you should do better. My point is that not everyone is going to go to college. And in fact, there is diminishing returns the further down you go on the rankings of colleges, to the point where those low-ranking colleges and college majors are looking like they'll have a negative return over time, even if the return to a college degree over time in general is very positive. But regardless, you're going to have people who don't want to go to college and don't want to join a skilled trade where you can make a really good living. And so the service economy, which is a growing and now large part of our economy, we should be celebrating that it offers wages that could be working wages or temporary wages for people working their way up and getting a degree, getting that trade. But I think we have to plan a society for all three strata. There have to be great opportunities that people can make for themselves post-college, a great living that people can earn post-trade, and a decent, if unglamorous, wage that people can earn managing a restaurant, delivering packages, or doing other service work. This is not bad. This is, in fact, good. And I think that part of the anxiety of the college-educated, and I saw this even in the discourse this week, college professors saying, hey, wait a minute, I could make more money as a UPS driver than I do as a college professor. There's a certain anxiety in the economic sorting. That's always been the case. It always will be the case. And so while the pathways are multivariate now, there's a lot of variables for each pathway. We all have to be smart. We all have to be diligent. We all have to be honest with the facts as we confront them. And we should work to solve collective problems while we work to solve our own individual problems under imperfect conditions.